And our today's coverage will be on, we are still on the NI analysis. We'll do the consumption analysis, savings and investment. And then we'll later on introduce the concept of the multiplier as well as the accelerator principle. So let's look at how we determine the consumption when we are given the level of the income. And we all know that consumption plus the savings would actually determine how much was the income level. So I have a table which we are going to relate the income, the consumption, and also the savings. But I want us to borrow the idea that we had in our last class, where we said once we get our disposable income, I gave you the outline on how to determine the concepts of the NI, and we talked about the disposable income, which is given by the personal income minus the personal taxes or the income taxes by the individuals in the country. The moment you get your disposable income, how do you spend that disposable income? We can note that disposable income is the amount at your own disposal. You can decide either to consume or even to save it. And therefore, we can note that that income would be distributed into two portions depending on the level of the income. And therefore, disposable income, as an equation, we can say it is consumption plus the saving. In general, we determine this particular level of income depending on the method used. We have got the three measures of the NI in a country. The NI accounting, remember, from the production, from the expenditure method, as well as from the income method. So when we arrive at that income level in the nation, we now decide on how to spend it. We can consider to consume it or even to save it. But savings would actually depend on, is there any balance after the consumption by the people in the country? So let's now look at, if you are given the level of the income in a nation, what happens to the consumption? So I have a few points to consider as my level of income, assuming this could be in billions of shillings or millions of shillings or trillion in a country. The level of the income, let's say it is at 1,000 units quotient, and that we are consuming 1,100. What does that one mean? Assuming the level of the income increases, say, to 2,000, and we are consuming, let's say, 2,000. If the level of the income increases, let's say, to 3,000, and the consumption is at 2,700, what is happening to that consumption? At 4,000, let's assume the consumption amount is at 3,200. And let's say at 5,000, the consumption is at 3,600. Let's evaluate the relationship between these two variables. We observe that Y being our independent variable, we are depending on the level of the income. Yeah, this is our independent variable in the nation. The consumption is depending on this level of income, so we call it the dependent variable. It changes with a change in the level of the income. It is dependent on the level of the income. So what is happening? When the consumption is at 1,100, the income is at 1,000. Then consumption increases to 2,000 when the income increases to 2,000. You can see the relationship between the consumption and the income is that consumption increases with an increase in the amount of income. You can note that. In general, consumption does increase with an increase in the level of income in a nation. The higher the income level, the more the consumption will be in the country. Let's evaluate what we call the, and maybe before we move on, you can see we are consuming more than what we have, for example, earned in the country. The consumption of 1,100 versus the income of 1,000, this shows that the nation has what we call a debt. There are many times when we normally borrow from friends, from the banks, so it means our consumption level is beyond what we have been able to generate within a given period of time. Like for a nation, we talk about a physical year of the government. So our income here, as it is increasing, you can see the consumption is also increasing. So we can say consumption increases with the amount of income. Let's look at what we call the average propensity to consume. Average propensity to consume. Propensity is all about the drive that one would have when it comes to a given variable, like we are talking of the drive now to consume. But on average, how is that a drive? In general, the average propensity to consume, which I'm going to abbreviate as APC, it is computed as follows. The APC is given by, take your consumption, measure it on average of the income level. We divide this one by the income level. At each and every level of the income, how much is a consumption on average? So for example, for the first one, how do we determine this? We'll take 1,100, we'll divide this one by 1,000, and as you can see, that will give us 1.1. The next level, we have 2,000. We are dividing this one by 2,000. This would give us 1.0. Let's evaluate the next one. We have 2,700. We are dividing this one by 3,000. That should give us 0.9. Next, we have 3,200. We are dividing this one by 4,000. 32 and 4, that should give us 8. So we have 0.8. And lastly, we have 3,600, which are dividing by 5,000. That should give us, because of 35, we have 7, so balance 10, 2. We have 0.72. So let's look at the relationship now between the APC and the income level. You can see the drive to consume does decline with an increase in the level of the income. That the higher the income, the lower the propensity to consume. Usually in one's life, there comes a point where you're able to satisfy most of your wants. And as you do so, you tend to have the drive or the urge to actually save more than what you're actually consuming. So you'll find that savings in terms of how much you are driven to save would increase the moment you end up now satisfying most of your wants as an individual in the country. Let's evaluate what we call the marginal propensity to consume. And this is a very important concept, marginal propensity to consume. and I'll abbreviate this one as the MPC. Marginal propensity to consume is computed as what? The MPC is given by the change in consumption, the change in consumption as a result of what we call the change happening in the level of the income. Change in consumption over the change in the income level. We have done so many computations involving the marginals. If you remember from the consumer theory, the firms theory, and we also introduced this one in the cost analysis. And again, I repeated this in your market structures, the work that I gave you immediately after the school was closed. So we have the marginals to be computed, and we all know the first level, we don't have anything to fill in. Reason, there's no point of comparison there before our first level. So let's determine how we are going to get the MPC at the second level. The consumption is changing how? You can see 2,000 is our new level of consumption minus the previous level of 1,100. We divide this one by the change in the income, which is between 2,000 and 1,000. And that will give us a figure of what? We have 2,000 and 1,100. That will give us a difference of 9. Divide by 1,000. That will give us a difference of a value of 0.9. Next level, we are measuring between our new level of consumption is at 27. Previously, we had 2,000. And we divide this one by the difference between our income levels, 3,000, our new level. Previously, we had 2,000. And this will give us a value of, you can see that is 0.7. The others, we can just compute them without writing down. 32 and 27, that is 5, a difference of 1,000, 0.5. Here we have 3,6 and 3,2, that is a difference of 400, a difference of 1,000 on our income. This will give us a 0.4. Again, you can see our marginal propensity to consume is actually declining with an increase in the level of income. So what are some of the conclusions we can make about our illustration is that, number one, we have observed from our table, and we always say if you cannot observe, if you cannot see what we are writing down, then it's not important for you to write it down. Ask and the explanation will be provided. From our table, we can see that the consumption increases. Consumption increases with an increase in the level of income. Okay? Number two, point number two is that the average propensity to consume, the APC, decreases with an increase in the level of income. And Finally, point number 3 is that the marginal propensity to consume again decreases with an increase in the level of our income. And we have explained why. As a result of somebody being able to satisfy most of his wants in the society, you have the drive to save more than maybe how you are consuming. Okay? We have noted this, that our equation Y as the income level, we usually use the capital Y to denote the income in a society, is given by the consumption plus savings out of our disposable income. So if asked how to determine the savings, how do you do this? Our savings are given by the balance after you have consumed. So income minus the consumption gives us our savings level. Do we see savings increasing or declining with an increase in the income? Do we see the propensity to save again increasing or declining with the level of the income? Let's use this illustration as we determine our savings, again, the level of consumption, or rather the level of the propensity under the average, as well as the marginal propensity to consume. So we are going to use the same table as we develop our savings. We can construct a new, or we add a few more columns on this table. So the level of the income remains at the different levels we have demonstrated. But now we want to introduce the concept of savings. And I'm going to call the savings capital S, and that is the letter that is usually used under the NI analysis. So our capital S, the savings, will be given by the difference between the income and the consumption. When we consume 1,100 at a level of 1,000, the income, there's a debt, so we register a negative value of the savings in the nation. At 2,000, you can see we are saving nothing. We have consumed everything. And this is our two cases here actually demonstrates what goes on, especially in the less developed nations. In a rare case, do we have savings? In many instances, actually in these nations, the African region, for example, will have debts, and therefore our savings will be reading a negative. 27 and 3,000, at least we have 300 there as our savings. Then when we have 32 and the level of the income was at 4,000, you can see we have some savings of around 800. And finally, when we are consuming 3,600 and the income was at 5,000, we have around 1,400 as our savings. So what is that you're able to relate between savings and the level of the income? Again, our income here is our independent variable. Savings are depending on the level of the income, so they become our dependent variable. And we can note here that the savings, point number 1, point 1, we can note that savings increases with an increase in the level of income in a country. Okay, let's go ahead and determine what we call the average propensity to save. Average propensity to save, I'll abbreviate it as the APS. And the average propensity to save, the APS, is computed as you take your savings, you find them on average of the level of the income. Savings divided by the level of the income. We're using the notations, S for savings, Y the income level. And let's see what will happen when we determine our APS as we relate it to the level of the income. The first level is at 100, which is a negative area. We divide this one by 1,000 minus 100. We divide this one by 1,000. That should give us negative 0.1. Next level, we have a 0 savings. So 0 divided by a number will always give us 0. Next, we have 300, which are dividing by 3,000. That should give us 0.1 positive. Level number next, we have 800 as our savings divided by the income of 4,000. That should give us 0.2. And lastly, we have 1,400 to be divided by 5,000. That should give us 2 because of 10, 8 because of 40, 0.28. And what are we able to determine from our table here is that our propensity to save on average does increase with an increase in the level of the income. So again, we can make a remark here and have a point to say that the APS actually increases with an increase in the level of income. Let's now compute what we call the marginal propensity to save, and I'll just call it the MPS, marginal propensity to save. And the MPS is usually given by the change in the level of savings. We'll call it triangle S. We all know what's the meaning of that. And then we divide this one by the change in the income. Change in savings as a result of the change in the income level in the country. So let's determine our first level. There's no comparison point, and therefore we have a dash. You cannot compute that particular value. The second point can be compared with the first point where the savings are at 0. So change in the savings will be 0 minus 100. We divide this one by the change in the income, which is 2,000 minus 1,000. Okay, 2,000 here minus 1,000. That will give us a value of, here we have 0 minus 100. That will give us 100 divided by 1,000. That will give us a value of 0.1. And we have seen the trade. The others, you can just compute them. Next, we have the difference between 800 and 300. That will give us 500. divide by a difference of 3 and 2. That will give us, sorry for that. We have missed this level. 300 and 0, that will give us a difference of 300. Then we divide by the difference between the consumption, which is 3,000 and 2,000. That will give us 0.3. Next, we have 800 and 300. That will give us 0.5 because the income is changing by 1,000. And finally, 1,400 and 800, that will give us a difference of 600. The income is changing here by only 1,000, so we have 0.6. What are we able to determine when we relate the MPS to the level of the income? We can note that the marginal propensity to save actually 0.9, 0.3, this was 0.1. 100 divided by 1,000, sorry. So 0.1, 0.3, 0.5, 0.6, you can see it's increasing with an increase in the level of the income. So again, we can make that remark upon how we observe the marginal propensity to save when it is related to the level of the income. The MPS, again, increases with an increase in the level of the income. So is there any conclusion we can make between these two tables? One for the savings and the other one for the consumption. I want us to do something together here. I want us to pick this column we are calling the APC, and we also pick this column we are calling the APS. At each level of the income, what are we noting? At each level, of income, this is one of the deductions we can make upon our two tables. If I take the MPS of 1.1, and I also take the MPS of 0.1 here negative, let's see what will happen. 1.1, and we combine it with negative 0.1, the result would actually be 1. Suppose we take 1.0, we add it to this 0 here. Again, it will give us 1. 0.9, we add it to 0.1, again it will give us 1. 0.8, 0.2, again it will give us 1. And if you are to take 0.78, 28 here, 0.72 and 28, this will again give us a 1. So we can actually note that the APC, the average propensity to consume, when added to the average propensity to save, the result should always be equivalent to 1. Let's pick the column marginal propensity to consume and the column marginal propensity to save. And again, at each level of the income, we determine what is happening between these two. For the first level, there's nothing to consider, so we'll not add that. The next level, we have 0.9. Let's add it to 0.1. It will give us 1. 0.7, we add it to 0.3. Again, it will give us 1. 0.5, 0.5, it will give us 1. And 0.4 and 0.6 here again will have 1. So the conclusion we can make is that at each level of the income, again, when we take the marginal propensity to consume and we add it to the marginal propensity to save, the result will always be equivalent to 1. This will be equivalent to 1. Why is it the case that when I take the MPC, I add it to the APS is 1, and that when I take the MPC, I add it to the marginal propensity to save, the result is still 1? Reason is because, this is because This is because our income, we had said, is distributed into two portions: what we consume, and if there's any balance, we consider to save. So the equation y equals to c plus s means that income is distributed into two portions. Partly it is consumed, and if there's any balance, we can consider to actually have the savings. Now, I want us to pick this equation, the MPC plus the MPS, the result is 1. MPC, marginal propensity to consume, if added to the marginal propensity to save, the result is 1. What if I am asked to find one when I know the other? What does that one mean? This would actually show that if I am asked to find the MPS and that the MPC is known, just take 1 minus the MPC. They are related in that the two put together, the result is 1. Again, point 2, you can note this: marginal propensity to consume can always be given by 1 minus the marginal propensity to save. If, let's say, you have the MPS, you can still find the MPC. And it's a common kind of a question that comes in between these two. Sometimes you're given one, you're told to find the other. Again, this equation is very powerful when it comes to how we spend our income. We partly consume it, yeah, and we also consider to save if there's any balance. So that is what we call the relationship between the income, consumption, and the savings. I want now to introduce the concept of what we call investment. So let's talk about investment. So we usually have 3 types of investments. Number 1, we have what we call the real investment. And this is the kind of investment where we'll see in the country, people are purchasing what we call the capital goods. Capital goods we have mentioned many times. These are the commodities or the products which will be used in the production of others. They're useful in the production. They are not there for consumption. You not take a machine home for you to consume, other than you'll have it for production purposes. So when we see people buying machinery, for example, when we see people buying, let's say, heavy motor vehicles, like the tractors, we think of what? There's a business that is going to take place. Therefore, the higher the level of real investment, which is measured upon the purchase of the fixed assets, for example, or in general, the capital goods, the more the investment will be noted in the country. I repeat, real investment is determined by the purchase of the capital goods in the country, those which are required for production to take place in the nation. And the more we are going to see the purchase of these capital goods, the higher the level of investment in the country. And it will be like a cycle now, because it will also lead to more employment opportunities, more income, and later on, more consumption, which again drives people to consider more investing more investment in the country. So that is what we call real investment. Real investment measured upon the purchase of the capital goods, because when they are purchased, definitely there's a business that is about to take place in the country. Number two, we have what we call autonomous investment. Autonomous investment. And this is that investment. This is that investment usually done by the government. Done by the government in the country. Done by the government in the country. Also known as the government spending. Yeah? Also known as the government's expenditure. And why do we call it autonomous? Reason it's called autonomous. This is very important. It is autonomous because it does not depend, on the level of income. Construction of the highways, yeah, the government has to have the funds, but the people of the nation are pushing for the development in terms of the infrastructure. The government has to consider such. Payment of the civil servants, whether there's money or not, the government has to look for ways to do so in the country. Such investment is called autonomous investment, and we call it autonomous because it does not depend on the level of the income. Finally, we have the kind that we call induced investment. And this is usually done by the people of the nation, and it depends on the level of income. Why we call it induced? It's because it depends on the level of income. So those are the three types of investments that we have in a society. The higher the level of investment, the more the job opportunities, the more the country will be registering growth. And if sustained, then we can talk of development.